I secretly went to see my husband who was working in another city, but I witnessed him cheating on me with my own eyes. He shielded the girl behind him and looked at me with a bit of defensiveness. Don't make things difficult for her. It's my fault. I'll take the blame for what I've done. Looking at him like that, I suddenly laughed as if I wasn't really that sad. How could he be wrong? He just wanted to pursue his passionate love. And what I could get was all of our property. How ironic. Apart from him, surely no one else still believes in love. When I saw with my own eyes that Keys was lying on the same bed with a strange girl, I was still so shocked that I couldn't say a word, although I had guessed it from the moment I entered the door. There was a pair of high heels at the door that didn't belong to me, and a bag that wasn't mine was hanging on the shelf in the entrance hall. Probably hearing the sound of me opening the door, the girls giggling in the room stopped abruptly. I walked to the bedroom and the door was open. Keys was smoking and he flicked the cigarette ash into the ashtray beside the bed. The girl huddled under the quilt, her head resting on his chest, not daring to look at me. Why are you here? You didn't even say you'd come in advance. Keys' voice was a bit hoarse. He stubbed out the cigarette before slowly meeting my gaze. There was no emotion in his eyes. No panic, no guilt, just as calm as still water. It felt like my heart was being tightly grasped by a pair of big hands. I looked at him in disbelief. Even though I had been mentally prepared, I still staggered back a step after hearing Keys' words. So it turns out that I need to inform in advance even when I'm going to see my own husband. I hid my trembling hands behind my back and looked into Keys' eyes. With great effort, I finally squeezed out a sentence from my throat. Do you know what you're doing, right? Only after asking this question did I realize how ridiculous I was. Of course he knew. I shifted my gaze to the girl. Probably encouraged by Keys' attitude, she bravely took the initiative to meet my eyes. With just one look, I seemed to understand. What's your name? I asked her. As soon as I finished speaking, Keys stretched out his long arm and shielded the girl behind him. Finally, there was some emotion on his face, a bit of defensiveness. Ella, don't make things difficult for her. It's my fault. I'll take the blame for what I've done. Keys got off the bed and rummaged through the wardrobe to find a brand new dress. He handed the dress to the girl, his tone full of indulgence and comfort. Honey, put it on. Go home first, and I'll come to see you later. The girl nodded timidly. She turned around and put the dress on. Keys personally zipped it up for her. Looking at him like that, I suddenly laughed. I laughed until the tears that were about to burst out were forced back. I didn't look at the two of them anymore and walked to the balcony in the living room. I opened the window, and the hot wind blew towards me like waves. The mood of driving over 300 kilometers to see him without telling him was blown away, along with the surprise I had planned for him. Keys personally saw the girl out the door and watched her enter the elevator. The front door opened and closed and opened again. Keys stood in the living room, only 2 or 3 meters away from me, but it felt like there was a deep chasm between us. He cleared his throat before speaking. Ella, let's talk. Keys lit a cigarette. He leaned back on the sofa, and when he mentioned the girl, there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, like a teenager who had just fallen in love. I'm so tired, really. If I hadn't met Lily, I probably wouldn't have been able to hold on long ago. Ella, there's no love between us anymore. Let's just call it quits. Since we don't have children yet, it's good for both of us. He was serious. Every word seemed to have been drafted countless times in his heart. The phrase, let's call it quits, casually brushed aside the 10 years we had been together. 4 years of dating and 6 years of marriage. The boy who used to be so cautious had grown up and changed. After finishing the cigarette, he got up from the sofa, took the car keys, and went out the door. Before leaving, he glanced at me. Think about the divorce. I'll try to compensate you as much as I can. After Keys left, I stood in the living room for a long time. I didn't sit on the sofa because I felt it was dirty. There was nothing of mine left in the house. Keys had probably put them all away. The doll on the bedside, the nightgown in the wardrobe, and the skin care products in the bathroom had nothing to do with me. I turned off the recording on my phone, took a few photos, and then went back to the car. The ultrasound report from the hospital was still on the passenger seat. I had carefully put it in a file bag. It was the surprise I had prepared for Keys. He probably would never know. After coming out of the hospital in the morning, I was so excited that I called Keys several times, but he didn't answer any of them. I didn't think too much about it. I thought he was busy. I took a leave from the company and drove to the city where Keys worked, wanting to tell Keys the news in person. Thinking about it, maybe there were signs all along. It started when he didn't come home often. The year when Keys and I were preparing to get married, his job was suddenly transferred to another city. He hugged me in his arms and patiently comforted me, "Ella, please trust me." But I didn't. I never believed in long-distance relationships. Later, he said he would give me all his salary, come back once a week, and report to me at any time. For the sake of his career and future, I gave in. Keys said he was tired. But I was tired too. When decorating our wedding house, I had endless arguments with the decoration team, but Keys didn't know. When both of our parents were hospitalized, I rushed back and forth between the hospital and home non-stop, but Keys didn't know. During the 2 years of preparing for pregnancy, every time it failed, I had to bear the pressure of our parents urging us to have a baby on my own, but Keys didn't know. Love made me overcome all difficulties and endure all the grievances alone. But Keys said that without another person, he wouldn't have been able to hold on long ago. I laughed at myself. Tears welled up in my eyes but didn't fall in the end. It seemed that I really wasn't that sad. So I didn't even want to have a hysterical fight with Keys. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I found a hotel. After taking a shower and lying on the bed, my thoughts were a bit muddled. Keys called me in the middle of the night. He probably went back and found that I wasn't there. "Did you go home?" He kept his voice low and there was no trace of a caring tone. Before I could respond, he continued. "I'll go home this week. Let's talk about the divorce. Just tell me what you want directly. Don't tell our parents for now." After he hung up the phone, my thoughts gradually cleared. Probably because I finally found out, he didn't want to pretend anymore. I forced a smile. So after returning to my own city the next day, I didn't even go home but went straight to the hospital. The tears that hadn't fallen before finally came down when I was making an appointment for the abortion surgery. The surgery was scheduled for next week. The child that I had been looking forward to for so long came at the wrong time. Just after coming out of the hospital, Key's mother called me. "Ella, are you at home? Your dad has made pork rib soup and stewed pig's trotters for you. We'll bring them to you now." Hiding in the car, I suddenly couldn't stop crying. My throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton, choking me so that I couldn't say a word. Key's mother was still chatting away. It wasn't until I pulled myself together that I replied, "Okay." When I got home, Key's parents were already busy in the kitchen. After greeting them, I hid in the bedroom. How difficult could a long-distance relationship be? Key's father was a soldier. Before he retired, Key's mother raised Keys all by herself. How did they get through that time? After having dinner and seeing off Key's parents, I curled up on the sofa. Suddenly, the words that Keys said last night echoed in my mind, hitting my heart one by one. "Ella, it's not that I've changed. We've both changed. The way you're so careful with money now really makes it hard for me to breathe, really. But Lily is different. She's innocent and carefree. She can be happy for half a day just with a piece of cake." I almost laughed sarcastically. Keys said I was too careful with money. I don't deny it. But it seemed that he had forgotten. During the 4 years in college, it was my living expenses that supported both of us. Probably because he had been a soldier, Key's father demanded of Keys with the same standards he had for himself. Keys didn't have much living expenses, but being in a relationship was costly. I scrimped and saved every penny to fulfill so many of his wishes. Later, after we got married, it was he who took the initiative to hand over his salary. For all the big and small expenses at home, the mortgage, the car loan, and the social interactions, I could only calculate them carefully one by one. I thought our life was getting better and better, but in the end, it couldn't withstand the harsh blow of reality. Keys said he had loved me. But it was just in the past. Later, something seemed to have crept in and changed the nature of our love. I smiled at him and didn't argue with him about any of his accusations against me. Since we didn't love each other anymore, what was the point of saying these things? I only asked him one question: when did it start with Lily? He pursed his lips and didn't say a word. I didn't mean to salvage our relationship. He probably misunderstood. That's why he deliberately called in the middle of the night to remind me that we had reached the point where we should get divorced. I wasn't that sad, but I still felt a bit sour in my heart. The wedding photos from 6 years ago were placed in the most conspicuous position in the living room, stabbing my eyes painfully. I walked over and took the wedding photos out of the frames. A piece of paper fell out and landed on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, but when I saw the content on the paper, my fingertips froze. When I stood up, I smiled as if in a trance. Probably even Keys himself had forgotten. 6 years ago, in order to marry me, he put all his promises on paper, word by word. His sincere and passionate love made me truly believe that he would be good to me for the rest of my life. In the first 2 years of our long-distance relationship, he would always secretly run home, 2 or 3 times a week. Chasing after the stars at night and the rising sun in the morning. I was so worried about him. He stroked the top of my head and said that there was a little crybaby waiting for him at home, and he couldn't rest easy. Later, he got promoted, and his work became busier and busier. Gradually, I also accepted this long-distance life. But he still insisted on coming home every Friday. His salary card had always been in my hands. If I didn't touch it, he would take the initiative to transfer the money into my card. The credit card bills were also sent to my email. I had never doubted his sincerity. But trust, like love, is like sand poured into a sealed glass bottle. Once it's broken, it scatters. I put that piece of paper away and was silent for a long time. It wasn't until the doorbell rang that I snapped out of it. All of Key's things in the house were packed by me into cardboard boxes. I called a Lalamove and asked the driver to deliver them to the place where he was living now. It was 8 o'clock in the evening when the Lalamove arrived. Keys called me, and his tone was a bit unpleasant. "Ella, what are you up to? What's the point of packing all my things and sending them here?" His voice suddenly became a bit harsh. I was stunned for a moment and then hung up on him. What could I mean? He was the one who cheated, he was the one who wanted a divorce, and naturally, he was the one who should get out. Keys came back at noon on Saturday. He stood at the door, pressing the doorbell continuously. Through the surveillance camera, I saw him with an impatient look on his face and Lily, who was constantly comforting him. I didn't expect that he would bring Lily along and come to talk to me about divorce so blatantly. Probably because he couldn't get into the house, he finally called me. "Ella, have you changed the lock? We haven't divorced yet. Don't go too far." It seemed that all the former tenderness was just an act. When love is gone, every word spoken is like a thorn. Lying on the bed in the beauty salon, I held the phone a little farther away. "Well, you also know that we haven't divorced yet? Then what's the meaning of you bringing your mistress here?" I seldom spoke in a sarcastic way. This was probably the first time I talked to Keys like this. My best friend lying beside me gave me a thumbs up. Keys on the other end of the phone obviously choked for a moment. He turned off the hands-free function on his phone, which had been on before, and finally his eyes fell on the surveillance camera. The day after I sent away Keys' things, I changed the lock and installed a video doorbell, by the way. Hearing my rhetorical question, Lily's face turned pale. She tugged at Keys' sleeve, and her eyes immediately turned red. Keys lifted the phone to his ear, and his tone became even worse. "Ella, there's no need to be so harsh. Lily isn't a mistress." I sneered and didn't bother arguing with Keys anymore. I made an appointment with him at the coffee shop closest to me. My best friend said she wanted to accompany me, but I refused. "It's okay. It's just a divorce. It's like throwing away a rotten cucumber. I'm the winner." Keys parked his car by the roadside. Lily didn't get out. She sat in the passenger seat, leaned against the car window, and looked into the coffee shop. Coincidentally, her eyes met mine. She flinched, and the car window was rolled up. When Keys came in, I had already withdrawn my gaze. He sat opposite me and pushed the divorce agreement in front of me. Keys had always been like this. Once he made a decision, he would definitely have strong execution ability. Take a look. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, you can mention it, and I'll ask the lawyer to make changes. I quickly scanned it. The reason for the divorce was the breakdown of the relationship, and the property division was 50-50 between us. I pushed the agreement back and stared at his face. He seemed to be more and more different from the Keys in my memory. I couldn't find any trace of our past love on him. I took a sip of the coffee in front of me and thought for a while before asking him, "Do you still remember what you promised me before we got married?" Keys almost blurted out without thinking, "Ella, I really don't love you anymore. Let's part on good terms, okay? For the sake of the past 10 years, don't be so clingy." He frowned tightly as he spoke, and his fingers tapped on the table one after another. Clingy? I smiled and shook my head. Keys, I'm not clinging to you. I just want to ask you if what you said before still counts. If it doesn't count, then the letter of commitment you wrote by hand should count, right? Perhaps after being in a long-distance relationship for a long time and getting used to being alone, I found that my heart had become very strong. So strong that even if the person I had loved for 10 years suddenly changed, I could accept it quickly. With him or without him, it seemed to make no difference. He was stunned for a moment. What do you mean? I made a copy of the paper that fell out of the photo frame of our wedding photo that day and pushed the copy in front of him. I won't show you the original. According to what you wrote, the car, the house, and the savings are all mine. Keys left angrily because of me. Watching his face gradually turn red, the depression that had been clogging my heart seemed to dissipate a lot all of a sudden, especially after he saw what he had written by hand. He probably finally remembered it. That's why the expression on his face was so colorful. Ella, you know what? I'm really fed up with your nitpicking appearance now. He pursed his lips tightly and squeezed out these words through gritted teeth. I should be sad, right? It turned out that he had already been so tired of me without my knowing. But I really wasn't that sad. Keys, it's not that I'm nitpicking. People should always be responsible for everything they do and every word they say. The so-called nitpicking was just that I wanted him to fulfill his promise. He said that if he did anything to betray me after marriage, he would voluntarily leave the house with nothing. Since it was something he promised himself, how could it be said that I was nitpicking? Keys pinched the space between his eyebrows and finally said after a while, Ella, that's why I don't love you. Lily wouldn't be like this. She knows better when to advance and when to retreat. After Keys left, I stared at his back and laughed until tears came to my eyes. Knows better when to advance and when to retreat. I'm not unaware of when to advance and when to retreat. I'm just too aware of it. That's why when I found that my marriage and love had gone bad, I chose to take a step back in time to cut my losses. Perhaps the current Keys had never thought that the empty promise he made when he wrote the letter of commitment 6 years ago would hit him right between the eyes 6 years later. That's why he was so furious. He wants to pursue his passionate love, and I have no objection. I want him to fulfill his previous boastful promises, and he shouldn't oppose it either. After coming out of the coffee shop, I went to see the lawyer recommended by my best friend. I didn't have much evidence of Keys' affair, but I didn't want to waste any more time with him either. After I opened the door and saw the high heels that day, I turned on the voice recorder on my phone. Later, when Keys sent Lily away and talked to me about divorce, he said a lot of things about him and Lily. From how they met, to how he was attracted by Lily, and then to the fact that he finally didn't have to lie to me that he loved me anymore. Give it a try. It's not a big problem. The other party has clearly admitted his affair and has even proposed compensation. This letter of commitment written before marriage is equivalent to a loyalty agreement. Did the other party put his fingerprints on it by himself? The lawyer was about the same age as me and frowned tightly while listening to the recording. His brows only relaxed a little when he saw the letter of commitment written by Keys. I nodded. Yes, he put his fingerprints on it by himself on our wedding day. Memories seemed to be torn open like a wound and the past events kept surging out. 6 years ago, Keys and I had just graduated. The passionate love made us eager to get married immediately. So our parents sat together to discuss the wedding. The betrothal gifts in our hometown were generally high. Keys' parents looked at each other, blushed, and didn't say a word for a long time. It was I who stood up to ease the great embarrassment between the two families. Mom and Dad, anyway, the betrothal gifts will be brought back in the same way as they were taken. Just for show. Numbers like 66,000 or 88,000 are quite good and auspicious. We can earn money to buy a house and a car by ourselves. Don't worry about it. Life is something we build up. We will surely live a good life. I was as certain as Keys that day. Certain that our future would be good and that neither of us would change. I didn't ask for the betrothal gifts. Secretly, I returned them to Keys' parents intact. Keys was so touched that his eyes turned red. So on our wedding day, in front of all our relatives and friends, he solemnly wrote the letter of commitment. He said that he might not be able to give me a prosperous life immediately, but he would work hard. I would always be in his future. Everything he owned would also be mine. So everything he owned, except love, should be mine. When I got home, Keys' parents were waiting at the door. They seldom came over on weekend evenings. My heart skipped a beat for no reason. I walked quickly towards them. Mom and Dad, why are you here? Why didn't you call me? How long have you been waiting? I took the big and small bags from their hands and hurriedly opened the door. I had changed the lock and also the password. Ella, are you hiding something from Mom and Dad? They looked at each other and thought for a long time before asking me. I was stunned for a moment. Although Keys and I had reached the point of divorce, we had reached a consensus. Before the divorce was finalized, neither of us should alarm our parents. No. I pretended to be nonchalant and answered simply. Keys' parents had always been very kind to me. Since I couldn't cook, they would come over every few days to cook the meals that I liked. They would deliberately queue up to buy the cakes and desserts that I liked. There was always plenty of fruit and yogurt in the fridge. In the past, when they came over, I could always chat with them about daily life and make them happy. But today, sitting face to face with them on the sofa, for the first time, I had the urge to run away. Marriage has never been just a matter for two people. Divorce is the same. Did Keys quarrel with you? Such a big thing is being pregnant, and you didn't even tell us. If Keys made you angry, tell Mom and Dad, and we'll scold him. Keys' mother said while observing my expression. Hearing Keys' mother's words, my heart skipped a beat, and I didn't even react at all. I panicked and wanted to deny it. I didn't. I met Aunt Wang when I went out this morning. She told us. Haven't you been having checkups at her place all the time? It only took one day from knowing that I was pregnant to deciding to have an abortion. I specifically made an appointment at another hospital for the abortion surgery. After making the appointment, I was so distracted by the divorce that I forgot that the news of my pregnancy couldn't be kept hidden. Aunt Wang was the doctor who did the B ultrasound for me and also a longtime friend of Key's mother. There's no reason. I just don't want it. At 10 o'clock in the evening, I sat cross-legged on the sofa, being stared at by my parents with gloomy faces. They had come here specially from other places. They bought train tickets as soon as they knew I was pregnant. Actually, it should have been a very happy and celebratory thing. But after knowing that I planned to have an abortion, the atmosphere in the living room became extremely low. Key's parents sat aside, wanting to speak to comfort my parents. They opened their mouths but then fell silent. They probably guessed that there were problems in my relationship with Keys. Ella, did Keys make you angry? I'll call him right now. Key's mother dialed the number quickly. I didn't stop her. The phone rang many times before it was answered. Hello. A sweet female voice came from the other end of the phone. Key's mother's hand trembled, and the phone slipped from her palm and hit the carpet with a thud. Keys and I had the same habit. We mostly memorized the phone numbers of our close relatives and friends and didn't save them in the address book. I took a look at the screen of the phone, which was still on the call, and a smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. It was good. I didn't need to explain anymore. Key's father suddenly stood up from the sofa and walked straight out of the door. Key's mother picked up the phone from the floor, looked at me, and then ran out after him. Finally, only my parents and I were left. Their faces became even uglier. I shrugged my shoulders and suddenly felt relieved. I've made an appointment for the surgery for next Wednesday. Keys's parents rushed to the city where Keys worked overnight. Presumably, they gave Keys a severe scolding. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, Keys called me, and as soon as he opened his mouth, he was filled with furious anger. Ella, I just realized how disgusting you are. We haven't had a baby for such a long time, and now that we're getting divorced, you say you're pregnant? She got excellent grades and also worked as a part-time fashion model. Occasionally she would, I'm telling you, I'm definitely getting this divorce. I leaned on the sofa, turned off the speakerphone, and hung up the call. Yeah. We hadn't been able to conceive for so long, but it happened at this time. I put my hand on my lower abdomen and my heart felt a dense pain as if being pricked by needles. I wasn't sad because of Keys's betrayal. Anyway, love is mostly like this. Looking back, my parents were standing in the corridor of the bedroom, looking at me with eyes full of heartache. I couldn't fall asleep. They couldn't fall asleep either. It's okay, sweetheart. Mom and Dad will accompany you to the hospital next week. When you recover, Mom and Dad will take you on a trip. Haven't you always wanted to travel abroad? I nodded and suddenly my eyes felt terribly sour. In the end, only my parents were there to support me. It seems that everyone can change, but they never will. Then Keys's mother called. She probably had been crying and kept apologizing to me in a hoarse voice. I'm sorry, Ella. It's Mom's fault for not teaching him well. Please don't be impulsive, okay? Mom and Dad will take him back tomorrow and make him apologize to you. Please forgive him this time, okay? On the other end of the phone, I could even hear the voice of Keys's father educating Keys. But betrayal only has two options, 0 times or countless times. What's more, Keys didn't need my forgiveness at all. What he wanted was love. Keys was still forcibly dragged back by his parents. The living room, which had always been empty before, suddenly became crowded. When I came out of the bedroom, I happened to see Keys being kicked in by his father. Just one glance made me feel sick to my stomach. I ran into the bathroom and retched for a long time. When I came out again, I happened to meet Keys's gaze. His eyes were full of disgust for me. He was standing at the entrance, in a stalemate with his parents. What do you think? Don't you know you have a wife? How could you be lured away by that little vixen outside? Keys, do you have to bring shame to the whole Keys family? Keys's mother slapped him again and again. Probably because Lily was mentioned, a ripple of emotion finally appeared in Keys's eyes. He pursed his lips. Lily is not a vixen. Mom, be more polite when you speak. I sat on the sofa and calmly watched this farce in front of me. I had never thought that such a melodramatic plot would happen between Keys and me. All that lovey-dovey stuff, and in the end, it was as disgusting as having swallowed a fly. Mom and Dad, you should go back. I can't tolerate any sand in my eyes. You've always known that. I'll ask a lawyer to talk to Keys about the divorce. I stopped Keys's parents. After a noisy morning, I was very tired, and they should be tired too. After saying that, I stood up from the sofa and walked straight to the kitchen. After a night, my parents seemed to have calmed down a lot. They just pretended that nothing had happened and had been busy in the kitchen for a long time. Seeing me come in, my father lifted the lid of the casserole. Here, I've cooked your favorite seafood porridge. Having an affair during marriage is not something honorable in the first place. I didn't make it known to everyone, which was already the greatest respect I showed for our 10-year relationship. But Keys didn't think so. He didn't seem willing to admit the promise he had written with his own hand and had a very unpleasant conversation with the lawyer I hired. Let's go through litigation then. I won't give in even one step. I must make him fulfill his promise. Not long after I had the abortion surgery, the lawyer called me. I stated my attitude, and the lawyer agreed with me. After hanging up the call, my mother patted my hand. All right, don't be angry. You also need to take good care of yourself during the postpartum recovery period. Have you already asked for leave from the company? I nodded. When I looked up, I saw Lily standing at the door of the ward. I didn't know how she found me, but her eyes were full of complacency and provocation. I frowned, really not understanding. Why do those who are mistresses always come to the original wife to seek a sense of presence? After Keys was brought back by his parents that day, she also took the initiative to add me on WeChat. She said that Keys had told her personally that only when he was with her did he experience what love was. She said that Keys had been tired of me for a long time. Actually, such a showdown was unnecessary. Even if she didn't force me, I would still get divorced. Following my gaze, my parents looked over, their eyes full of confusion. Who is it? Do you know her? After thinking for a while, I shook my head. Not really. She's Keys's mistress. My voice wasn't too loud or too soft. There were other people in the ward. Hearing the word mistress, everyone looked at Lily at the door with disgust. The family member of the patient closest to the door rushed to the door of the ward in one step and slammed the door shut. Before closing the door, he spat and said, "Bad luck. See? Being a mistress is like this. Everyone despises you." There was a queue for divorce litigation. Even when I was discharged from the hospital, it hadn't been my turn yet. As soon as I got home, my best friend came to see me without delay and brought me good news. She had asked someone to say hello, and it was estimated that the lawsuit between Keys and me could be heard in court soon. I asked the lawyer, and we're sure to win. But for your joint property, are you sure you've calculated it clearly? I nodded. There were records for the house and car we bought after marriage. Keys's salary was also regularly transferred to my bank card. He would also take the initiative to send me his pay stubs. Even after he got involved with Lily, he still didn't slack off at all. Now that I think about it, if he hadn't put on such a seamless performance, how could I have not noticed it at all? I jokingly pretended to be relaxed and said, "Whether there's love or not, it's okay as long as there's money, right? You have to get back the things he bought for his mistress too." My best friend glared at me and reminded me. The things he gave her weren't worth much money. I know. I'll definitely get back everything that should be retrieved. Thanks to Lily adding me on WeChat and liking to show off her love on moments, all the things Keys gave her were posted by her. I just took screenshots and sent them to the lawyer. The lawyer replied with an "okay" and told me to relax. While waiting for the court session, Keys's parents came to see me several times. Actually, they knew the password, but they still rang the doorbell on their own initiative every time. They wouldn't come in until I opened the door. I thought they came to persuade me to give in and part amicably with Keys and not go to litigation. But it seemed that they really just came to see me. Every time they came, they brought the soup they had cooked, told me to take good care of myself and then left. At first, my parents gave them cold looks, but later they could only find excuses to avoid them. In the past, the two families became one because of Keys and me. Now, because of Keys and me, one family has become two families again. On the day of the court session, Keys argued forcefully. He didn't deny the fact that he had an affair. Standing in the defendant's seat, he didn't forget to look affectionately at Lily, who was sitting in the spectator's seat. Like a pure love warrior, he held high the banner of love. Keys's parents gradually showed disappointment in their eyes when they looked at Keys. Having been a soldier for most of his life, Keys's father probably never expected that his own son would do such a thing. That letter of commitment was indeed written by me on our wedding day, but it can't be used as evidence. It has no legal effect. I don't admit it. If you don't admit it, why did you write it? I looked at the unfamiliar Keys and laughed. Until I took out the video of our wedding that day, in which he read the letter of commitment word by word after writing it. His voice spread throughout the banquet hall through the microphone. He said that he was willing to accept everyone's supervision and that he would only love me in his whole life. He said that if he had an affair in the future, all the property, including savings, cars, and houses, would be mine, and he wouldn't take a penny. He said it himself, and no one forced him. He wrote it himself, and no one forced him. In the end, the law was on my side. The mortgage and car loan had been paid off 2 years ago. We basically had no debts. After 6 years of marriage, most of the savings were in my bank card. Keys was not convinced and wanted to appeal, but his parents stopped him. Enough, don't make a fool of yourself. Keys's father had a very ugly look on his face and slapped Keys across the face. Keys's mother shook her head. She walked up to me, took my hand, and stuffed a bank card into my hand. The password is your birthday. It's a token of mom and dad's affection for you. Keys doesn't cherish you. It's his loss. Keys saw it and sneered. He said sarcastically, Ella, don't you think you reek of money? Except for houses, cars, and savings, you have nothing in your eyes. You really disgust me. It's really funny. I've already got the houses, cars, and savings. Why would I still want that illusory love? It's not like I've never had it before. It's even worse than eating shit. Keys took Lily's hand and walked towards the parking lot without looking back. After thinking for a while, I chased after them. Gase. Remember to wash the car clean and send it to me. The car belongs to me. According to the judgment, he has to send it to me within a month. Keys paused in his steps and glared back at me viciously. Lily quietly broke free from his hand. She followed behind Keys, and her steps became more and more hesitant. I exchanged an amused look with my best friend. Probably only Keys still believes in love in this materialistic society. Especially the love between him and Lily. All the things he bought for Lily were required to be returned on the spot. Keys said that he would find a way to compensate me, so I didn't hold on to it anymore. I dug out the chat records between Lily and me and showed them to my best friend. Lily said that a marriage without love is like a pile of loose sand and will fall apart sooner or later. My best friend burst out laughing. After all, feelings without an economic foundation are more like a pile of loose sand. And this pile of loose sand fell apart even faster than we expected. According to the requirements of the judgment, Keys dragged it until the last day to come and handle the transfer procedures for the house and car with me. Keys's parents still loved Keys after all and left the small house they lived in to him. The old couple quietly went back to their hometown in the countryside. When they left, I went to see them off. I returned the bank card that was stuffed into my hand to them and called them Mom and Dad for the last time. Standing at the entrance of the Government Affairs Hall, he hesitated for a long time before speaking. If I say I regret it, will you forgive me? I'm serious, Ella. I seem to regret it. My best friend was almost dumbfounded. I opened my mouth, took the queuing number slip, and urged him, without even giving him a proper look. Keys, don't you think you're being too wordy now? You really disgust me. After the formalities were completed, I could finally part ways with Keys. Just as I was about to leave, he suddenly grabbed my arm. Ella, you're even more heartless than I thought. Why can you just let go of our 10-year relationship so easily and not even leave me any room for redemption? It seemed that he couldn't understand my determination. Well, that's understandable. From the moment I discovered his affair to the complete end of our relationship, it was only 3 months. I didn't make a scene or have a big quarrel. I was as calm as an outsider. I shook off his arm and deliberately taunted him. Because I know that no matter how sad I am, we can never go back. Besides, didn't you find your passionate love? What about your love? It's only been a few months. What? You talk about love with Lily, but she doesn't talk about love with you. My best friend couldn't help but burst out laughing. She's just a girl in her early 20s. She can't really be after your feelings, right? Do you really think you're a pure love fighter? When I was in the divorce lawsuit with Keys, I applied for property preservation. After the judgment was made, Lily probably realized that she really wouldn't get anything. It was said that she had a few quarrels with Keys and then threatened to break up. Perhaps our ridicule was too loud. He took a step back. He looked much more haggard than he did a month ago. The more I looked at him, the more satisfied I felt. After thinking for a while, I still left him with a sentence before leaving. Keys, cheer up. Remember to always believe in love.